Today, I wanted to do a quick demonstration on how to use the basic navigation instruments that are in the Cessna 195 business liner. So we're going to go over how to fly a very short but course or flight plan using a VOR and an ILS. So I love flying into Santa Barbara. It's one of my favorite little airports. So we are going to fly into Santa Barbara, but we're just going to take off on the other side of the mountains here at Santa Ynez. So we're going to click plan. Before we go any further, sorry, I should explain that I am in SkyVector, which is a free website, so you don't even need to register, that has all different charts and sectionals and things like that that you can plan flights on. You have everything from world low airways to high airways, different charts for all the different procedures. But we're going to focus on the VFR sectionals. You can right click anywhere on here and it'll bring up the closest waypoints, airports, VORs, all that sort of stuff. To where you clicked. So I right clicked on Santa Ynez and I clicked plan, which popped it into our departure. Now we're going to come down here and right click on Santa Barbara, and we're going to click plan. And that is drawn a nice straight line to get us there. That is a direct route. Now we want to use a VOR and an ILS. So nice thing here is that you can grab this and drag and drop. We drag and drop it onto Gaviota. We can say, yep, we want to go there, and I click the plan button, and you can see now this is our en route sort of page here. So that's got us going there, but then it's got us going direct to Santa Barbara, but we want to fly the ILS. So if we go ahead and right click on the airport, and now if you just hover over it, you have all these different choices that pop up. But we're looking to do the ILS runway 7. Now there's two ways you can do this. You can click on it here and it brings up like an in-browser window and it shows it, but it does block the map a little bit. So it's personal preference. I like to come over to it and click on the little PDF icon, and that opens it up in a new tab for me to look at without covering up the map. So if we look at the approach plate here, we can see that they have Gaviota on the ILS, which basically means this is kind of like a transition to get over onto the ILS to fly into Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara's right here. You can also see it gives us a heading of 163. So we know that flying out of that, we need to be at 163 degrees, and then we need to intercept the ILS at 75 degrees. Now, in the aircraft, what you want to kind of do is kind of cut this so it's a nice arc so that you can meet into it. Now, we'll also have our vertical guidance coming down into the runway. So that's going to be displayed on the CDI once we tune on to the ILS. So we've got a couple of things that I personally like to write down physically just as a way to have it recorded. So first thing I'll do is I will write down the frequency and degrees to get to the VOR. So the frequency for Gaviota is 113.8. So I'll write down 113.8, and our first heading is going to be 178 degrees. So then I'll write 178 degrees. Now, coming out of there, we know we need to go 163, but that's not represented here. So what we need to do is if we actually drag this over to approximately where that waypoint is going to be, which is going to be pretty much in line and straight down, we click on there and we can see that that habit, which is the first waypoint on the ILS, is now on there, and we have a sort of complete flight plan. So I would write down 178 and 163 for the Gaviota VOR, and then for the frequency for the ILS is 110.3. So then I would write down ILS runway 7, 110.3. This says 76 degrees. The actual approach chart is saying 75. That's because this 77 is going to like the center of the run of the airport and not necessarily that runway. So those are the things I'd write down. I'd also, come in here, and if have it supposed to be at 3,500, I'm going to try and cut the corner a little bit so that way we can enter in sort of the middle point here. So I'll probably aim for more of like a 3,000 point. But then that's all you need to do to get a very basic flight plan in, and it's short. This is only 23 miles, so it's not going to take us long to fly this. So let's go ahead and hop on into the simulator, and we can show how that's all going to work in the world map view and also inside the plane, and then we're going to fly it. Okay, so here we are in the simulator at the world map. Now you can do this two ways. You can literally just pop yourself onto our starting airport because we already have our flight plan and frequencies written down, and we can just fly it that way. If you would like to, though, you can recreate our flight plan inside the simulator. There's a couple things that you'll want to do. So right now we already have Santa Ynez selected. I'm sitting at on the ramp at parking 18, and Santa Barbara is just down here. So we've already got that as our departure. We can click on Santa Barbara and set that as an arrival, and then you can see we've got a straight line. But we don't have any of the waypoints or the VORs that were showing up on SkyVector. So if you come down to More and then Filters, you can scroll all the way to the bottom, and you can see you have a couple different options under navigation. So we want to turn on nav aids and also the fixed waypoints and RNAV positions. So we can go ahead and click those on, and if we close that down, you can see we now have all these waypoints. And here's the Gaviota VOR. So if we go ahead and click on that, we can say, let's add it to our flight plan. And then the next one after that was on the ILS, which was the Habit waypoint. So we can go ahead and click on Habit and add it in. So you can see here's the waypoints for the ILS. And you can see that we've got coming out to the VOR, and then coming down to Habit, and then into Santa Barbara. So very simple to recreate, not necessary though, seeing as we already had all the information we needed as far as headings. But to get used to it, you can always have that, and if you start to get lost in IFR conditions and stuff like that, you can bring up the VFR map in game, and you'll be able to see your line, see how kind of close you are to it. So let's go ahead and jump into, actually we want to change runway 25 to runway 7. And we are good to go. So let's go ahead and jump on into the aircraft. All right, so here we are at Santa Ynez. We are already fired up. We can go ahead and pop on our avionics to go ahead and get everything tuned in. So we know that the Gaviota VOR is 113.8, so we just need to adjust that slightly. And then we know that our initial course out is going to be at 178 degrees. So this is known as a CDI, and then you have basically your course button here, which is labeled as OBS, which I believe is Omni Bearing Selector. But we need to go ahead and tune this, which you can do just by rotating that. I have a little peripheral to do it, so we're going to make that 178. There we are. Now you can notice that as I was rotating that, some things were jumping around. This needle here, in order to be on the correct radial that is 178, needs to stay in the center. This arrow means we're going towards the VOR, and then once we pass it, it's going to say that we are flying out from the VOR. As soon as we fly out from the VOR, we know that we need to change our heading to 163 to head more sort of south east and toward or southeast in order to get to the first waypoint on the ILS. Speaking of the ILS, I like to go ahead and tune it into our standby frequency, which is 110.3. So we can pop that in. And once we get closer, we can go ahead and swap that over, and we can start to then watch the needles move for us to try and intercept that as best as possible. There's a couple of things that make all of this a little tricky. One is that we only have this single CDI, so we don't have, say, like another one, so we could have both these showing the needles at the same time at different courses to kind of line up as you're crossing them. The other thing we do not have is what's known as a DME, which would be super nice if there was one right here, which tells you your distance and estimated time until you're hitting that waypoint, which can make the turns a lot easier. The other thing I will say is it is a hazy, typical morning in California. We do have live weather and live time on, so we're about 9:40 local time, live weather. The winds are relatively calm, which is nice. So one other thing that I'd like to point out is this is a short flight. And we're already very close to that scaveoid of VOR. And as you are closer, this needle gets super sensitive because it's like, okay, well, you're, flying directly over it, and you're going to end up being, say, you're 60 feet to the right. It's just going to be like way over, and then you try and correct and it goes way back, and vice versa. So over longer distances, it's much easier to keep it in the center, and you're getting close when all of a sudden it starts to get really twitchy, and that's okay because you're in the vicinity, right? You're not gonna, you can, if you're really good, get that lined up perfectly as you cross over, but that is rare. So with all that being sort of said, let's go ahead and get on into the air. I've got pretty much everything already set up. We can go ahead and taxi over. The taxiway is just over that way, and we can go ahead and pop off our parking brake and get a little bit of throttle in. Go, and we can start to get over to that taxiway. There it is there. Big old radial engine on this aircraft is always interesting to taxi, but looking off to the side, it seems to help. So we've already got our lights set, which, it's typically you would do all this before jumping on the runway. I did just set my transponder to be in alt modes. So you can see this mountain. I'm going to stop right here real quick we're going to be flying through this, and we're not going to be able to see what we're doing. This plane is also very twitchy with the trim wheel, which I've mentioned before, so hopefully we can try and, get that balance. We're going to go up to 3,500 feet. There is a peak to the right of the VOR that is about 5,000, and there's another one to the left, which is around 4,000, but where the VOR is, I believe, is at 3. So if we go at 3,500 feet, we're going to definitely clear over it, and it does mean that we don't have to descend as much coming down to the ILS. So we'll go ahead and get on to the taxiway. No flaps are needed, as they are sort of all or none on this. We're just going to go ahead and get us slowly up to full throttle here. A little bit off the center line, that's okay. Try and get that straightened up. And we can go ahead and rotate. But not the best little takeoff there, as I overcorrected to try and get onto the center line. But you can see this needle is already moving over because the VOR is really kind of right over there. So we want to make that turn, and we're going to have to really kind of turn past it as we are now basically past it, and we need that needle to be in the center. So I'm doing a relatively aggressive climb to try and get us up to that 3,500 feet. But I am going to bring back the RPMs now that we're clear of obstacles, and bring back my manifold pressure a little bit here to be a little kinder to the engine. I still need to bring us over more, and just watch for that needle to start to move back. See it's sort of twitching a little bit there. There it is, it's starting to move back. So we can make our turn back over to our heading, which is going to be 178. And you try and do this as like a nice gentle arc to get that to line up just as you're passing it, which I turned in a little early, but since we're so close, it's going to be getting sensitive anyways, so I'm not too concerned with that. We're heading at it, and it's going to work out just fine. So as soon as we get over it, though, that's going to jump down, and that's where we want to change our course to that 163. We're coming up to our cruising altitude, so we can go ahead and... So there we are, sort of almost directly over. And actually I can see it really. It's right about here. So that's what's nice with VORs, is that they're, and they are represented pretty well in the game, that they're these little sort of round things, typically on a high peak if there are peaks in the area, or if they're closer to an airport, you can see that. So since we can see it, we're already going to try and turn over to 163, and we'll go ahead and I'm adjusting this dial here to be 163, and you watch, we're going to be flying out from that VOR in just a second. There. So we just passed over the VOR. I'm already at pretty much 163. You can see that needle coming over, which means we need to turn over a little bit more and try and do the same thing of getting that intercepted, so that way we're flying out now on the 163 radial. I'm just going to make small adjustments to my heading to try and get that back into the center. And like I said, this is a twitchy trim on this, so you can see I'm kind of bouncing between, 5250 and, 3250 and 350. So there it is coming over. Get lined up here. So now this is where, like I said, this is a super short flight, so we can make changes pretty quickly here. Where now, if we've already got the ILS tuned, you can see we're flying on that radial nicely, so this means that we're flying directly to that habit waypoint. But we can go ahead and swap over to the ILS and see if we can pick it up, which we can. So what we can do, we know we're lined up to habit, and we can try our best to stay on this course, but we can turn our course now over to that 75 degrees, which is for the ILS. We now have two needles. One is going to be for the vertical navigation down to the runway. The other one is going to be the same as what we've been doing, which is going to be your sort of horizontal navigation. Now I'm going to start gently turning over, because we got to come all the way over to about here. I want to gently turn that over, so that way we don't have this needle just jump over on us all of a sudden and we fly past it, especially on these like ILSs. I'm also bringing us down to about 3,000 feet, and I'm going to slow us down a little bit more. So you can see this needle is already coming down, and that's why I wanted to start slowing down, because we are going to capture that. So we're heading out about 90 degrees now. I'm going to try and level us off here and get our speed under control. Now this is where it gets tricky, because we now have to pay attention to our descent rate according to the needle on our CDI, and then once this one comes in, we're going to have to pay attention to that one coming in. So right now we're kind of cutting that habit waypoint in order to get us over, instead of having that be just super twitchy all of a sudden. So you can see as we're getting closer, this is starting to come down. I'm going to try and slow us down even a little bit more. So there it is, it's coming over. So now this is where it's super important, especially in these conditions, to make sure that these guys stay crossed. And it's hard, especially, like I said, in these conditions, because you're flying blind. And like there, I just made a little overcorrection and started to gain altitude, and I've come off both of them. So we need to try and correct that. So there's the needle coming back over. Try and get that as straight as possible. I'm still descending to try and catch up to the glide path here. I'm hoping that we're going to break through these clouds a little bit and be able to see the runway. So I just made an aggressive descent there to try and get us back on course. You can see I'm doing what's called chasing the needle, where it's like I'm going a little bit past it. And that typically means that we are close, which makes it tricky. So I'm going to slow us down even more. And I am making too many corrections to my heading, as I'm really focusing on trying to get that glide path set. Now we're too low, so I just want to kind of level us off and get this a little coordinated. There we go. I like that. That's a little better. And actually, I can just barely see the runway lights now in front of us, which is going to help out a lot, because now I can really sort of guide it with a visual point. But really, if you're doing true instrument flying, you'd want to set it up so that way those guys are always crossed. Just bring that power back a little bit to try and get coordinated here, because now we're just a smidge high. But you can see what you want to do is make sure that those are crossed. And this is a good data. I would recommend when practicing this is to do it with a nice clear day, but we should break through the clouds, and the minimums for this is going to be right around 200 feet. So what that means is that if you do not have the runway in sight at 200 feet, then you would do a go around and try and get that to a point where either you can see the runway, or you're going to have to go to an alternate, or wait for the weather to clear. Alright, so we are looking Okay, a little low. I'm going to go ahead and bring in our flaps now. Bring up that power a little bit here. So, still a little low, trying to correct that. There we go, that's coming back down. There's the runway in sight. And I still haven't gotten great at landing this thing, so bear with me. This is definitely an aircraft that takes some time to really finesse. Now, also on this, the ILS chart shows that after a certain waypoint, the vertical guidance is no longer in effect, but it seems to be okay in the simulator all the way down to the ground. So really, I'm trying to ignore that I'm seeing the runway, which is hard to do when you can actually see it and you're coming in, but we're coming up to that 200-foot decision altitude point. We've definitely got the runway in sight. Everything's looking pretty good. Alright, we're going to try and do a two-wheeled landing. Just going to float it, burn off that speed, let it come to neutral. Little bit of a bounce. Actually, I don't know if we did have a bounce there or not. There's the tail down. Trying to stay on that center line is tricky. Yeah, not too bad. Alright. There we are. We are arrived. I'm just going to try and keep that center line kind of off to the side for me here so I can see. Tell you what we're going to do to make this even easier. Let's go to the outside view. I'm going to bring our flaps up. Just put on the brakes. Come on, off on the taxiway. There we are. That is a very basic rundown on how to navigate in the Cessna 195 business liner. It is tricky. I'm glad we had these conditions today because it definitely shows how these instruments can get you to where you want to go. I didn't do an awesome job coming in on the ILS as I was sort of bouncing in between both, of being too far to the right, too far to the left. But it takes practice. But you can see it, once we got coordinated, I slowed the aircraft down, we were able to kind of keep them crossed and to fly the ILS. As far as using the VORs, that worked out very nicely where it guided us directly over it, it swapped, and we were able to make that turn to head down to intercept the ILS. So I hope that helps explain on how to use the very simple navigation that we are given in this aircraft. And until next time, this is Sprocket Simulations wishing you happy flights and silky smooth landings. Take care.